Prof, I'll be careful not to touch anything. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. It is really full here tonight. It's beautiful. It's always very much appreciated when the scholars come out to support one of their own. So thank you very much for doing that. I would like to take this opportunity to very briefly this evening welcome all of you at Mandela University. I would like to greet the Vice Chancellors, the Deputy Vice Chancellors, and the Deans of Faculty, and particularly Professor Hendrik Lloyd, who is the presiding, whose faculty is recognizing and honoring Professor Fourie this evening. I would like to congratulate you, Professor Fourie, this being the apex achievement in the life of any academic to be elevated to the position of a full professor in recognition of your lifetime work. So my congratulations. I would also want to recognize the family as I have been requested by Professor Fourie this evening. I would like to recognize Lynette Fourie, who is the beloved wife of Professor Houdini Fourie, for her continuing support, caring and encouragement through all his endeavors as an academic. The prof wrote that, and I thought I should repeat it as it is. Lynette, where is Lynette? You are welcome, ma'am. Thank you very much for being here. I would like to recognize the children of Professor Fourie as requested by him. Liani and her husband Stefan and their grandson Yanku. They are here. Where is Stefan? Okay. To cook, I hope. So, Professor says I should say about Liani and Adele and her husband George, as well as Marie-Lise, another child of Professor, and Lynette Fourie. He says that I should mention to this congregation that his children have made him proud to be their father and to be their grandfather, and for their fantastic and continuing support. He said I must tell the congregation. And then also Prof said I should recognize Charles Fourie. These are siblings of Professor Fourie. Charles Fourie, Edwin Fourie, and Marie-Lise Lategan, for their continued support and their effort to travel to Port Elizabeth to attend this event. I would like to see them, please. Thank you very much. Thank you. You are welcome to Nelson Mandela. Thank you for honoring us with your presence. I would like to also recognize Professor Lisa Ottinger and all the colleagues and students from University of Kansas that are here. These are colleagues and friends. Again, Prof wants us to thank them for their continued support. Where are they? Where is Professor Ottinger? You are all welcome to South Africa, to Nelson Mandela University this evening. Thanks for honoring us with your presence and for honoring our colleague. And then I would like to recognize the collaborators of Professor Fourie, because when I read his profile, he is a highly collaborative scholar. So there are so many colleagues that he collaborates with, which we will not name them by name, but they are here. And those that could not be here, we want to recognize them for giving us a scholar of this caliber through their support. Professor, I would like to address you and to acknowledge the courage and topicality in the choice of what you have chosen to speak about. You could have chosen anything. The role of leadership in evolving the positive organizational culture is important. Not only have we seen an upsurge in reported cases of individual and organizational lapses in leading ethical institutions, we have also been unsettled by some lapses and failures of some, I might add, not all, in the accounting profession. A few, but those who have failed to live beyond reproach. And because your work involves more than just standing in front of the class, it involves educating young people who are supposed to call our society to account, particularly for public institutions. As we all know, strong organizations, and indeed strong nations, rise and fall on the ethical compass of those that are charged to lead. And indeed, they rise and fall on the presence or the absence of the will to lead. Hence, Professor, I think your choice of this lecture is both resonant and relevant. Hence, we look forward to your lecture this evening. As I have often remarked, we are here to build for the future, not for ourselves, so that what we teach and what we choose to research should align to the purpose of a public university, which is fundamentally to serve humanity. Your lecture promises to take us some steps in that direction. I sincerely wish to welcome all of you at Mandela this evening and to thank you for taking time to be here to enjoy this lecture and to honor Professor Houdini Fourie. I want to add that he has taken a role of the director of school in the times that have been trying for him personally and for the university in general and for the faculty, Professor Lloyd. So I would like to thank that, Houdini. Congratulations again from myself. And I would like now to call the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Business and Economic Sciences, Professor Hendrik Lloyd, to introduce the professor. Thank you very much, colleagues. You are most welcome here.
Vice-Chancellor, Deputy Vice-Chancellors, Executive Deans, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce to you my colleague and friend, Houdini Fourie. Houdini is born in Pretoria. He was one of 5 children, brothers Charles, Vic, Edwin, and sister Marlies. Houdini is married, in his words, to the most amazing woman in the world, Lynette. And they have 3 daughters, namely Liani, Adele, and Marlies, and also the proud grandfather and mother to son Janku. Houdini completed his high school career at the Hoërskool Verwoerdburg, now Centurion High School. And during his high school career, he engaged in several activities, amongst others ballroom dancing, sang in choirs, but also did some off-road motorcycling and racing and athletics. After his matric examination, he joined the Office of the Auditor General and commenced his profession as an internal auditor. In January 1985, Houdini enrolled as a part-time student at the Technikon Pretoria for the National Diploma in Government Finance, followed by further diploma, a National Diploma in, a BTEC in Internal Auditing, and then later on an MTEC in Internal Auditing. After 8 years at the Auditor General, Houdini became an academic and joined the then Technikon of Pretoria, where he was appointed as a lecturer in internal auditing. During his tenure at the Technikon Pretoria, he was also the national coordinator and convener for the curriculum redesign process of the National Diploma and the BTEC qualifications in internal auditing. On 1 July 2008, Houdini joined our university as a senior lecturer. Pursuing his mission to develop and enhance the research culture within the School of Accounting, Houdini started involving all his colleagues in the accounting school to become involved in research projects, and through that they of course started engaging in research activities and became excited about research. In 2010, Houdini was awarded the Faculty Emerging Researcher of the Year Award, an award never given to anybody in the School of Accounting because research didn't exist there. So he was really invigorating the colleagues at that moment in time about research. On 3 September 2014, Houdini graduated from the University of Pretoria with a DCOM in internal auditing. He was the first person to actually receive such a qualification in South Africa. Houdini's DCOM thesis under the supervision of Professor Herman de Jager is entitled Work Readiness of University Graduates and Internal Audit Educational Expectation Gap in South Africa. Houdini's research career is characterized by collaboration and sharing, as our VC indicated, and through his collaborations, he led and coordinated the South African research team with that of what is currently known as the African Europe Research Team, and they, of course, combined delivered several outputs and also long-standing research relationships, such as with the University of Pisa in Italy, Ghent in Belgium, and also the London School of Business in the United Kingdom. A second successful collaboration was that with 4 other universities in South Africa, namely Pretoria, UNISA, Monash, as well as Tshwane. This collaboration, later on dubbed as Ikutu Research Team, involved 9 researchers and resulted in more than 15 research outputs. A third collaboration took place between Tshwane University of Technology and the Nelson Mandela University, which involved 10 researchers. The aims of this collaboration was to first enhance research capacity amongst the colleagues of the 2 participating universities, but also to develop a revised teaching approach for diploma-type accounting educational programs. The project was funded by the Department of Higher Education and Training to the tune of about 1 million rand. The Mandela University and TUT collaboration resulted in several research articles, conference papers, both national and international, and also resulted in a book called Inclusive Accountancy Learning Programs in South African Higher Education, an Adapted Teaching Approach. It also resulted in a long-standing collaborative agreement between us and the University of Kansas. And we've just signed an MOU between Nelson Mandela University and the University of Kansas for the exchange program that involves students as well as staff members. A further highlight in Houdini's career was, of course, the fact that he also supervised the first MCOM accounting student at our university and was also the supervisor of the first PhD in accounting at our university. The top achievement in Houdini's career, he says, was when he was rated a C3 researcher at with the National Research Foundation. Other achievements from Houdini over the years includes being elected to the board of the Institute for Internal Auditors as Vice President, Education and Training. He later on became Regional Governor of the Institute for Internal Auditors, first in the Pretoria region, and then, of course, when he moved to PE, within the PE region. Houdini also received the Southern African Accounting Association's Lifetime Achievement Award for his contribution towards the accounting profession. He's only one of 3 people who ever received such an accolade. Houdini is currently a member of various professional bodies, which includes the Institute for Internal Auditors, the South African Institute for Professional Accountants, and of course also the Information Systems Auditing and Control Association. Houdini currently fulfills the role of Director of the School of Accounting and is doing an absolutely wonderful job thereof. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends and family, help me to welcome Professor Houdini Fourie to the stage.
They say when you start getting over 50, you must be cautious not to become emotional when things are happening. Prof. Rousseau van Solms once said, actually when we had his farewell party, he becomes emotional even when the pep stores close 5 o'clock in the afternoons. So, Prof. Lloyd, thank you for a very, very kind introduction. Please allow me to also greet all our dignitaries, Professor Sibongile Mutwa, Prof. Leach, Prof. Denison, all the other deans of the faculty, then of course Prof. Foxcroft, the Dean of the Teaching and Learning Dean of Teaching and Learning, and then of course Mrs. Lynette Fourie. Lynette, thank you for everything you've done so far. It really helps to have someone to lean on and to take your nonsense out on and so forth. So thank you for all that. And then of course, Lisa, you and your team, thank you for being here. Lisa Ottinger from the University of Kansas, with Jim and Diane Guthrie. We really appreciate you and your students being here. I really appreciate, I would love to say actually that you came all the way here just for this event. I think I must claim that. I think it's worth saying that. And then, of course, academic colleagues, you are really someone I can rely on. You help me a lot through whatever I have to endure. My students, some of my students are here. That includes undergrad, postgrad, PhD, and well, my PhD student wished he could be here. He's in Venda at the moment. And then, of course, friends and family. Prof. Mutwa and Prof. Lloyd has said the kindest words that I actually could not better on, so thank you for all that, and thank you for being here, everybody. This lecture was originally scheduled for the 14th of August last year, so I was kindly given the extension to present it tonight, and coincidentally it works out very well, so there is definitely sometimes, not sometimes, always a reason for things happening. Then, of course, I have to extend my sincere gratitude to the university management for understanding and allowing me the opportunity to deliver the lecture today. And in addition, I owe this university and all my colleagues in South Africa and around the world a great thank you. I firmly believe in progress through sharing and to collaborate, and it really worked for me. And if it was not for all the people around me, that I would not have achieved what I have so far. So without any further ado, allow me to continue with the enticing information. I hope I'm not going to make you all depressed afterwards. We have wine served afterwards. So if you feel that there's a little bit of depression, have a glass of wine. Initially, I'm just going to give some context about how I want to approach this paper. I think all the content that is in the paper and all the information that is available was not possible for me to condense into a 40-minute presentation. So firstly, I'm going to set a little bit of background, just show some trends of fraud and corruption, and that's actually all around the world. And then I'm going to briefly talk about cultures and ethics, and then whose responsibility is it actually to worry about fraud and corruption and all this. What I must do, I must drink enough water. It feels like I have a hangover. My mouth is dry. So the first shocking slide says this. 79% of the 7.6 billion people in the world live in countries with corrupt governments. And we are not excluded, and we're not the only country. And further, people say that corruption does not result from a lack of ethics or knowledge, which was quite a surprise to me to learn that it's actually something different. They say it's a workaround chosen. Chosen, knowingly chosen, intentionally choosing what you want to do. And because people see there are better opportunities, which is a bit worrying in a sense. In this slide, we see what is enlightening here is that we are not the worst in the world. We see that that area of the world sits with 62% percentage of cases involving corruption. Now, this is, one must understand this information provides not the detail of who's the top criminals in the world. It shows what percentage of the crime per country is corruption. So we are not even in the top 4, which is sort of encouraging. I want to actually use the comparison to say that corruption, in my mind, is very similar to cancer. I've got some experience of cancer, so I can talk with authority, I guess. I compare corruption with cancer. There are, for example, cancers that you can survive, and then there are those that you cannot, that will kill you, especially if you don't detect it in time. Now, that's exactly what I'm saying about corruption. If you can detect corruption in time, and it has not invaded the organization or the body, it can be managed. Dr. Papeta might correct me if I'm wrong. So corruption is exactly like that. If you can detect it early enough, there's a way that you can actually work around it or get rid of the right people, or they should be called the wrong people. And of course, the opposite is also quite obvious. If you can detect it, you can prevent it, you can stop it, but if you don't, it will kill, or it can kill the organization, which has happened in the past. The next 2 slides are just briefly showing you the 10 worst corporate accounting scandals of all times. Fortunately, once again, they are not South African, but we've not yet got the latest stats into the slides, so I'm actually curious to see what's going to come of stats when we hear about the new surveys that people are going to do. With regard to that first one, the waste management scandal, the CEO was involved. And what you must look at is the fraudster in most of these cases are the CEOs of companies, the heads of the companies. So the very people that's actually supposed to lead the company, they are the people that commit the crimes. In the case of that first one, they were caught after a new CEO and management went through accounting records. So it's sometimes useful to fire your best person, to actually get a chance to go and look at what's happening in your accounting records. And after the scandal, the new CEO set up an anonymous hotline. With regard to Enron was one of the most, or the best known of all the cases. Jeff Skilling got 24 years in prison. His partner in crime, Ken Lay, was, I guess, fortunate enough to die before he was sentenced to prison. And, very interesting, Enron was named America's most innovative company for 6 years in a row by the Fortune magazine, shortly before they were found to be so corrupt. And then the third one is WorldCom. Sarbanes-Oxley Act was passed consequent to the WorldCom. Ebbers, Bernie Ebbers, the big role player there, or the CEO, he was sentenced for 25 years in prison. So I guess they know the menus in prison at this stage. Cynthia Cooper, who was the head of internal audit, uncovered the fraud. And I've met Cynthia. I was honored to meet her. She has told me that it was a nightmare to live through all that. She had to take her family and hide them away. They had death threats coming their way continuously. She has actually written a book afterwards, after all this, so it's actually interesting to read her book as well. The Tyco scandal, it happened at the height of the scandal. Well, I mean, at the height of the scandal, the CEO threw a $2 million birthday party for his wife on an island. He loved his wife, I guess. The reason for all this was because of unauthorized loans, fraudulent stock sales, executive bonuses or benefits, looking after themselves. And the SEC actually uncovered the fraud, the Securities Exchange. The Health South scandal, Richard Scrushy now works as a motivational speaker. Can you believe it? He was the oak that caused the company to fail or to almost collapse. The CAE, the head of internal audit, and the auditing firm was fired. And Scrushy was acquitted of all fraud charges, but was jailed for 7 years for bringing the governor of Alabama into disrepute. So what is also interesting to look at here is the auditing firms that were involved. PwC paid a $225 million compensation to investors. E&Y settled for $107 million as a claim against them was taken to court. The next lot, I don't think we have to go into so much detail about all this. The Freddie Mac scandal, he got fines of $125 million, and they were just fired. No jail sentence, nothing. The AIG scandal, the American Insurance Group scandal, after posting a corporate loss of $61.7 billion, the AIG executives rewarded themselves with $165 million in bonuses. And they were also caught by the Securities Exchange. A note, I specifically say every time who actually uncovered the fraud. We'll get to that a little bit later. And then the Bernie Madoff scandal and so on. So what is notable, once again, the auditors on this side. In this one, E&Y was, or Ernst & Young then, they now EY, was actually part of the scam, which is a bit worrying. And then in this one, PwC got a 2-year ban in India from doing any further audits. So what it says to us is that modern business is really in for something. We don't know when to expect it, what to expect it. As I say there, well, it's not me that said it, it's PwC that wrote it in their fraud survey. The question is, do business executives really understand the risks of fraud and corruption? Do they understand that they are actually all targets of these fraudulent activities? Do we really know how inherently unethical we are? All of us. Every year, we hear of more and more cases of fraud and corruption, and fraud risks are increasing even more so with IT integration. Consequences are expected to be more costly and severe where IT is involved. Has anybody heard of the Ashley Madison online dating site? Looks inviting. What they say there, life is short. Have an affair. And what the whole thing is giving across as a message is this woman has got a ring on her finger. So, the members of this club are good people, educated people, and they have a reputation. And then in July 2015, this site was hacked. The hacker claimed to be an ethical hacker. They called themselves the Impact Team, and they threatened to expose all the names of the members of this site if the two sites are not closed down. They had two sites, which Ashley Madison was the most prominent one. And what is interesting is to see that a priest committed suicide when he learned that this site was hacked. So, look at who the members were. There were 36 million members, of which 5 million were women. Men, 31 million. So there were 7.2 million men for each girl. What's your chances? What is very interesting about, I've not included all the stats. We could go on all evening about Ashley Madison. It's actually the most interesting case to look at. Remember earlier I said there's some sort of unethical behavior amongst many, perhaps all of us. What happened? Currently, that site sits with more than double the members that it had in July 2015. It sits now with 80 million members. Who on earth do they think is responding to them? If you look at the previous slide, let's go back there. It says there, see your matches. There are so many matches. Men to match with, but not girls. You have to compete with so many. Okay. And the other interesting fact is that people actually used their work email addresses to become members of Ashley Madison. And there we are. And what was extremely interesting to learn is that there were actually NMMU staff, members of Ashley Madison. One of our colleagues have got a list of these. Well, he's got a little memory stick with the data. And there were NMMU staff, members of this club. And they still thought that there's a chance for them to meet someone on this dating site. Right, let's go back to more financial type business. Now, what I tried to do with that Ashley Madison site is just see how fraud and corruption actually grows when you play with the emotions of people, with the emotionally sensitive stuff. Remember, we are actually very natural. There are certain things that drive us. We need to eat. And like animals, we need to reproduce. That's one of the drives. And that's, I think, where it comes from. So yeah, I think that the natural drive behind people, and especially men, might be the reason for all of this. Let's look at this slide quickly. Once again, this is not that South Africa has got the most crime in the world. We're not winning anything here. This shows that of our crime, economic crime is the highest of the world. So we sit at 77%, and worrying in a sense, is that France sits at third with 71% economic crimes of all their crimes. Now, their total crime might be a lot less than ours, but still the economic crimes are too high, in my opinion. Even Belgium sits there. Again, in a way, reassuring, ironic that we can say that even France and Belgium also appear on the top 10 list. The types of fraud activities that we see, tax fraud is the top one, but the one that happens most is actually asset misappropriation. Asset, money, vehicles, and what we also see is procurement fraud. I think that's going to jump through the sky with the new stats coming for South Africa. I'm actually concerned to think what it could be. And then we also have a few names that we could share with everyone. The PIC, the Public Investment Corporation, took steps about a year ago to organize ethics management interventions. However, as testimony coming out of the PIC Commission shows that the project was subsequently squashed by top management, and the overarching character of the workplace continued to be one of fear. So there's intimidation, threats that are being made to people. Now, currently, the PIC management has to face a lot of allegations made against it. Then we've got Steinhoff on the list, which is again in the news right now, but the worrying signs have been around for far longer than the present scandal. The following is an extract from the company's 2011 corporate governance report, and I quote, "Steinhoff has not established a formal process for obtaining assurance on ethical awareness and ethical compliance throughout the group." And this is from the USB management review. Eskom. The CEO of Eskom is also well known as the Prince of Darkness. More than a decade ago, Eskom established an official ethics office and appointed an ethics officer dedicated to run it. Indeed, Eskom was one of the first organizations in South Africa to do that. It did not work. SARS, the National Prosecuting Authority, similar stories played out at the South African Revenue Authority. And the National Prosecuting Authority, both of which had formal ethics offices, staffed by numerous professionals, people with, might be professional accountants or chartered accountants, members of the Institute of Directors, we don't know exactly who they are, but they are professionals. During the last few years, these functions have been rendered ineffectual by a lack of top leadership support, and then suffered severe damage to their perceived credibility as a result of the unethical behavior. And then, of course, the Prasa one, where the Transnet scandal came in, it involved millions of rands in tender fraud, once again, that procurement fraud. And then, of course, Nkandla, private property of Jacob Zuma, funded by taxpayers' money with more than 180 million rands to improve apparent security. The Transnet one, Gupta family business scored billions of rands in kickbacks, between 38 billion to 54.5 billion rands. You'll note I have abbreviated the long amounts, not to battle to pronounce. So, what is this thing that we call fraud? Fraud is an intentional act. We've seen that it is people that decide they want to do something willingly, knowingly what they're going to do. So it's an intentional act, either for personal gain or for corporate motives, to evade tax, to blow up the value of the share price, to cheat the investors to buy more shares or whatever. everything done intentional. So the key of fraud is that it is intentional. So questions that have sprung to mind: why do some people engage in these things? Is it intelligence? Is it poverty? Is it the level of their education? Is it a genetic thing? Can you inherit it from your parents? Is it a cultural thing? Now, I just must make something clear. Culture here does not only refer to ethnical cultures. There's a business culture, there's a university culture, there's a culture in a hospital. Wherever you go into, there are different cultures that you experience. Actually, when you walk into a specific place, let's use the example of a bank, there's an ambiance that you can experience, you can feel it. That's also part of being of the cultures that I speak about. And then ethnical. Has it got to do with what my voortrekker grandparents did, or is it not? We don't know. But I've tried to actually go into this. We'll talk about it just now. Aspects that need clarification first. How do we develop a culture? And this becomes interesting. And what is culture? Briefly touched on it. Does or can your culture affect your ethical behavior? And then, of course, what is ethical behavior? And important to perhaps look at this little square here is, how do we distinguish between what is right and what is wrong? Okay, how do we develop or adopt a culture? I've looked at Albert Bandura's social learning theory. According to that, habits, behaviors, mannerisms are learned through repeated exposure, continuous observation. So if we think of a small child, how does that small child learn? Many times you will see a little boy will do exactly or sit exactly as his daddy sits, or he would try and walk like his daddy does, or a girl might dress up like mommy does. She wants to wear the high heel shoes that mommy wears. So that's how they learn certain habits. That's according to the social learning theory of Bandura. So what is a business culture? Now, Hofstede says that the collective mental programming, and I want to emphasize the word programming, of the mind which distinguishes members of one human group from another. We can think of any sports event, like a rugby game between the Madibas and Stellenbosch or whoever. The University of Stellenbosch students have got their culture, their type of slants that they sing, and the Madibas, we have got our own habits and our own behaviors that we want to do, and we feel that we belong to this group, and we can distinguish ourselves from the other group because of the geographical place that we are situated in, and many other factors. So, then what constitutes a business culture? Social differences relative to cultural dimensions, such as the power distance dimension, refers to situations where more powerful individuals and their power is acceptable. And we can think of perhaps political leaders. The more charismatic, the more convincing people, they actually get people's attention. They draw attention with what they say and what they do and how they do it. Then the next one is individualism or collectivism. This concept of individualism as opposed to collectivism, according to that one, individuals are members of one or more in-group, like a university or a school or a church or a religion or a family. And they cannot really detach themselves from this group. The individual's relation and association with this in-group is assumed to safeguard that individual, and that results in a sort of an expectation of loyalty by the in-group of the individual. So we see that quite often in African cultures, where there's a sort of a demand from the group that you have to be loyal to this group because we've taken care of you for so long. And it sometimes can be ending up in not good results. The masculinity thing, I think that's where the Asian medicine thing also comes in. It refers to the extent that members of a society especially the male members, are strong, ambitious, competitive. They strive for success, and people then respect everything that this strong, big man says or do. I can't really think of an example of a state president, Lisa, that I would want to mention now. And then, of course, uncertainty avoidance. This concept relates to the aspects that are unstructured, unclear, and unpredictable. Some people don't like that. And that's actually those things that sometimes create student protests on our campus, total disruption of activities and people having a go at their government or at their municipal leaders. We have seen service delivery protests. People are not happy. And then the uncertainty avoidance would result in cultures being more aggressive. Right? So the question is, does culture affect behavior? It does. Culture is a significant determinant of ethical attitudes of business managers. So it seems that when we appoint managers or leaders, let's call them managers, we need to do a little bit of background research on where this person comes from. It's not meant that everybody with a bad background or whose dad is a criminal will also end up being a criminal. That's not what I'm saying, definitely not. So what is interesting here is that there's this few things that actually play together to actually form part of the cultural learning, which will end up affecting a person's ethical behavior in any setting. Saying that, what is ethics? Come on, now what happened now? Shouldn't do this. That's the only one thing that will guarantee to fail you at any time. Fortunately, my background is not offending anybody. Okay, let's find out where we were quickly. Right here. Apologies for that. It's something I did not intend doing. As I said, the cultural learning takes place and we move into a space where we actually learn ethical behavior from our background, where we come from, what we are exposed to, what we see happening every day, what our moms and dads did when we were little. One thing we need to also remember, it's not, what I want to say is education doesn't start at university or at school. It starts actually from the day that you are born, and in some cases before you are born, you will hear the music that your mommy listens to and so forth. So it's actually a whole lifelong learning that takes place from very, very small. So ethics or ethical behavior. Now you will often see ethics and morals being used in the same context or sometimes simultaneous or separately. And it always refers to that which is good or right in human interaction, acceptable to society. And these key terms actually then presents itself, the self, the good, and others. What do I do for the good of the others? That's what we try to say there. Attributes of integrity then, which I gathered from all the evidence that I've read, there's responsibility and trust and behavior, principles, relationships, the choices that we make, reliability, and of course morality. And there's a little picture that shows how all these are actually working together to determine the integrity of an individual or of an organization if you want to. So ethical theories that we look at are these: egoism, social group relativism, cultural relativism, utilitarianism. I did practice to pronounce that word. Deontology and virtue ethics. Utilitarianism is ethical consequences. In other words, the application of this theory relates to whether the result or consequence of an action is best for the greater good. The core idea is then that an action is right if it results in the happiness of the greatest number of people in a society or a group. However, if you choose to do something morally wrong, even though it may be legal, your happiness will decrease. Deontology talks about an act that is not good morally, but it can lead to something good, such as, this is perhaps not a very good example, but I'm going to use it. It says, shooting the intruder that is threatening your family's lives. It's totally unethical to do that, but it has a good ending, I guess. So it means that protecting your family is the rational thing to do, even if it is not the morally best or the unethical thing to do. And then, of course, virtue ethics mainly deals with the honesty and morality of a person, of an individual. It states that practicing good habits such as honesty, generosity, makes a moral and virtuous person. Now, we've looked at all these fancy terminologies, but there's always the question, why do people commit fraud? Literature has got this fraud triangle. It says there must be pressures. It's either a motivation or an incentive to commit fraud. Your financial well-being or your poverty is a pressure on you, and that is one of the factors that could convince you to commit this fraud. Then, of course, you can rationalize it. You can justify it. You can say, oh yeah, I am poor, and because I'm poor, I have to get this. I'm entitled to this. And then, of course, there will always be an opportunity. So if we could, as management, manage these three factors, we could, in a way, reduce fraud. And then there are definitely red flags to look for. When a person lives beyond his means, suddenly you see a red Ferrari pulling up in the driveway and all those type of things, and they go on overseas holidays with the whole family every now and then, even if they're not academics, I mean. And they have a very close association with the suppliers or the customers of this company. They cannot afford to upset the customers and suppliers. And then, of course, we said financial difficulties, and those with the wheeler-dealer attitudes. These are the four things that are the most seen red flags of fraudsters. Gender of fraudsters globally, 82% male, 18% female. It leaves me with two questions. Is it as a result of gender inequalities in the business world? That's very possible. Or, well, the next question I want to ask is, ladies, do you really want to claim equality? I would not want to be one of that. If I was a lady, I would not claim that. And then compare it to Ashley Madison. 86% of the members were male and 14% were female. Very similar. Okay. Psychological characteristics of convicted fraudsters. Those that were caught. Those that are not caught are still out there. They work alone and are autonomous. They've got the skills to outsmart internal controls. They can beat the system. They are usually very intelligent. So one of my initial questions was, is it the dumb people that commit crime? No, it's not. They are intelligent. They are highly intelligent. Jeff Skilling was not an unintelligent person, the CEO of Enron. They know how to tell lies. They can tell a lie without even blinking. They are convincing in doing that. They do not betray themselves. They are psychologically very, very strong people. Now, folks, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to claim any of these that I've got lots of knowledge of this, but this is what I've read, and it makes a lot of sense what I've seen in the literature. Taking these into consideration, these are the three gents of three of the top 10 crimes in the world. Who is most likely to commit fraud? It is the middle-aged male person on managerial level. Sorry, Prof. Lloyd. And this person has authority and power as a result of his position, or as a result of her position. Let's be fair to the girls as well. But I want to actually keep this to the males. Let's keep it as male. And Jeff Skilling is one of them. Bernie Ebbers. I wonder whether they communicate with one another in jail. And Mr. Buntrock is also one of them. But look at the faces. This old Bernie, he looks like a strong character. And he looks like a person that could scare people. If he says you work until 7 o'clock tonight, you don't argue. You just do it. But that's the idea. That's the impression that we get. They have authority. They are strong people. And they don't care. So for these two companies that both collapsed, senior managers were involved. They were intimidating, strong individuals. The whole behavior resulted in total unethical and ineffective leadership. And the whole organization resulted being labeled as unethical. And sadly, these organizations did not survive it. So, just for the sake of those who might be interested, this book was written about the Enron scandal. It's very interesting to read. It actually gives a lot of detail. So if you're interested to read that, it might be worth reading it. Then look, let's go back home a little bit to South Africa. The cost of proactively preventing fraud is the problem. It diminishes the comparison to the costs that are actually incurred to prosecute it. So it's too expensive to investigate these frauds. And this says it all. One of every 5 South African organizations had to spend between twice and 10 times as much on investigations as the original amount that they lost through the fraud. So why on earth would they want to investigate it? Fraudsters know this. For every $1 of fraud, businesses incur on average $2.66, or roughly 2.5 times the actual loss itself. It's still a costly exercise. This was an interesting one. Insurance scammers and rogue tradesmen helped to drive 1.2 billion in UK, that's pounds, not rands, in UK fraud during 2018. The reaching courts in the UK rose by 78% in 2018. That's a bit shocking. I wonder why that would be. Brexit, perhaps? I don't know. And then, of course, we have to say it's not us. It's not the auditors. It's not our fault. Whose job is it to manage and find and detect fraud? What is the role of the board of directors? Firstly, they have to oversee and monitor management's actions. So the board is not all executive people actually involved in the business, but they have to oversee. It's their responsibility to make sure that proper fraud management takes place, to identify fraud risks. Well, I've seen many organizations don't even understand fully what risks are. So how can they identify the fraud risks if they don't fully comprehend what it is, what a risk is? And it's their job to design and implement anti-fraud measures, and they must also set the tone at the top. They must put policies in place that drive ethical behavior. Once again, it comes back to the tone at the top. So what they see, what your junior people see happening at the top, and we can compare it to our South African government over the past 11 years before Cyril Ramaphosa was inaugurated on Saturday. I think many public sector officials saw that this is what our president does, so it seems okay. King 4, as one of the King reports, well, it started in 1994. The King Committee on Corporate Governance started issuing the King reports then, and the latest one is the King 4 report. The second principle says that organizations or management must govern the ethics of the organization in a way that supports the establishment of an ethical culture. Remember, we spoke about cultures. You learn a culture by seeing, by observing, by seeing what your leaders do. So who's responsible to prevent, detect, and investigate fraud and corruption? We learn about the combined assurance model, and these are the members of that combined assurance model. The board of directors, who is also, in our case, the council or the governing body, audit committee. What is noticeable that we have not heard anybody asking any questions to the members of audit committees of Eskom and the companies that were mentioned. And they have a clear role and a responsibility in terms of all these. The external auditors, of course, we are part of the combined assurance model, and then the internal auditors. And these are also seen as the 4 pillars of corporate governance, that which the whole organization rests upon. So, the primary responsibility for managing fraud risk is the governing body and executive management. So what's the role of the auditors then? We do see that society, the public, demands a lot more of auditors than what we are actually supposed to be doing. So I'm saying, is it a fair expectation to ask the question, where were the auditors when the fraud was discovered? What does a statutory audit currently provide the public with? It is only reasonable assurance in an audit opinion. It's no guarantee that everything is in order. It's no guarantee that there's no fraud, that there's no crime. So the question is reasonable assurance enough? Is it enough for what is demanded by the society in which we operate? And just this comment, I had to put it in. It says, the source of the audit profession's value is also the source of its vulnerability. And it's talking to reputation. One of our big 4 auditing firms in South Africa has suffered a reputational thing recently, and they are suffering the consequences. Even the students from our school that were signed up with that firm were sort of under the firing line. They were asked, are you really going to join that firm? Are you sure it's the right thing? Why don't you choose another one? So it's all those unfair things that actually, as a result of, and it actually is 2 or so rogue individuals of that auditing firm that caused all this nonsense to happen. And the whole of that auditing firm throughout South Africa suffered the consequences. Even here in PE, the people really suffered. And they've lost many customers because of that. And it's not what they did here in PE. The whole firm suffered a blow to their reputation. So was it fair for KPMG to actually suffer all that consequences? And as I said, I think it's an unrealistic expectation. Even way back in 1993, Dieter Gluck, he was a professor of auditing at the University of Pretoria. His thesis was all about the expectation gap. In other words, do public not expect too much of the auditors? And then already he said, auditors must only provide statutory audit services, not all these consulting and other things that they can make a lot of money with. The controlling bodies, he said, that would be SAICA and URBA in our case, must investigate the independence of auditors. He said that in 1993. And greater power must be given to audit committees. They have got power, but they're not brought to book to report or to actually account for what they have done or what they have not done, perhaps. Audit reports must contain an independence declaration. These things were suggested already in 1993. Dieter Gluck also suggested, he was a very well-known figure with SAICA at that stage, he suggested that there must be a body in South Africa that appoint public auditors for companies. SAICA almost took away his membership because he made those statements. And that would actually have saved some of the things that's happened in South Africa if that had happened. So in my opinion, professional bodies, auditors, educators, trainers must do some introspection and relook our competency frameworks. I know that SAICA is currently busy with the SAICA 2025 drive. The Institute of Internal Auditors are looking all these. I must say the CEO of the Institute of Internal Auditors, who is also a dear friend of mine, Claudel van Eck, has recently stated that we need to look at what is it that is actually expected of us. In terms of the current competency frameworks, auditors are not required to have a high competence level in fraud detection and fraud investigation. They only have to have an awareness level thereof. So it's not the primary job of the auditors to detect and investigate fraud. Fraud investigation is a specialized job to do. You can't let anybody do fraud investigations. We've recently heard that the way that auditors treat source documents and put tick marks on all that actually destroys the originality of the source document. If it has to be used as evidence in a court of law, you might have spoiled the evidence by putting your auditor's stamp or whatever on it. So we did not even know that as auditors until recently, and I think many auditors still don't know it because we are not fraud investigations. So interesting, the following few slides shows us who actually and what actually detects the fraud in organizations. The biggest one is tip-offs. Internal audit, then second, management review, and I'm glad to see management reviews actually third in line. I would have wanted management review and accounting recons and those things to be right on top, but it's tip-offs that actually make people, or the auditors or the management or the SEC or whoever, to detect where a fraudulent action is taking place. External audit sits right here in the middle because it's not their primary role. And they cannot be blamed for sitting here. This is not a competition. This is what's really happened. IT controls detect a few. So those are the things that discover the most. And as I said, auditors sit right there. Here we see the external mechanisms. Confessions. A confession might be internal or external because you deal with suppliers and consumers and you deal with customers. External audit, monitoring could be internal and external. That's why I've put it in the middle around here. And then these are the internal mechanisms that we would like to see detecting the fraud. Tip-offs here is the same information from the previous slide, is way above everything else. So it seems that having a fraud hotline is the way to go, to allow people to anonymously, without having to mention their names, tell us about things that happen. Coincidentally, I know of at least 3 internal auditors that have been murdered in South Africa for investigating certain accounts or aspects. So it's not a safe space for auditors to just reveal and go crazy. They are actually literally threatened with their lives. Their families are threatened. Interesting stats here that the higher the level of authority of the fraudster, the larger the fraud loss is. The longer the person is employed, the larger the fraud loss. So we must get rid of people quicker, it seems. Fraud losses caused by men are higher than those caused by women. The higher the age of the fraudster, the larger the fraud loss. He's perhaps preparing for pension, we don't know. And then, of course, this is worrying, this is concerning. It's not nice to see this. The higher the level of education And there are very highly qualified people in this university, the larger the fraud loss. And then, of course, the purchasing and upper management and marketing departments, they are the sections that actually reveal the highest or the larger fraud losses. More fraud cases are reported to happen in accounting, upper management, and sales departments. So this is the larger fraud losses, and these are the amount of frauds that are reported. Most fraud perpetrators are first-time offenders, those that they catch. So in summary, I would like to ask a few questions. I said there are some unanswered questions. Can auditors be trusted? Do auditors have integrity? Do auditors understand and live the values of their profession? And can business leaders be trusted? Can government be trusted? You don't have to answer. Is it attributable to the African cultures that we have more corruption in South Africa? I don't know. We have to still, I think, do some research on that. Is it because the African value system is different to that of the rest of the world? What we have in South Africa is forcing people to adhere to a value system that is Western values based. It's not based on African values. So are we not missing the plot totally by not looking at what are the actual value systems that we need to look at for Africa? I'm not saying Africa does not have value systems. There are proper value systems. The story of the gift. When you have to go and visit a chief of an African tribe, you are required to take a gift. The purpose of the gift is to open the conversation. What is traditional is not for that person to take that gift and go and spend it on himself. Traditionally, in terms of the culture, that person shares that gift with his community. And that seems to me like a good value system. Because an external party comes into this community, wants to perhaps do business in my surrounding, and I can share with my fellow members of the culture the gift that I've received from this person. What we do in South Africa, auditors, you come perhaps from an African culture, you may not receive a gift. It's totally head-on with what the person has grown up with. And it's probably not wrong if the person does accept a gift. But we don't always know for what reason the person receives the gift. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to take place from the persons or the people from the African cultures and the people from the Western cultures to understand what's actually happening amongst the cultures and what is important and what is not important in particular cultures. So, background builds culture. Culture affects ethical behavior. Occupational crimes follow specific patterns, and occupational crimes have similar characteristics. All of them show the same characteristics. Auditors are not your best defense against economic crimes. A false sense of trust exists. People think auditors, once the financial statements are audited and we've got an audit opinion, you can fully rely on those financial statements. Auditors only audit a very small sample of transactions when they do audits. If you just want to do a calculation, say for example an organization has 20 million transactions a day. If you expect auditors to audit all 20 million transactions, and let's say it takes on average 10 minutes to audit a transaction, you can work out how many years it will take to audit one day's transactions for auditors if they have to audit all the transactions for a day. Auditors must do introspection. I agree. We must look at what should we actually educate our students. What should we know more than what we currently know? Industry 4.0 is the new buzzword. Are we ready to educate our students to be ready for when they leave university with all the IT aspects attached to it? And then society expects or demands more from auditors than mere reasonable assurance. It's not good enough anymore. So my questions that remain unanswered: do people understand ethics and ethical behavior? I don't think so. Why Do people in my organization commit fraud? And the my is, I think, everybody sitting in this room. When will that happen in my organization? Not will they commit fraud, when is it going to happen? It is going to happen, or it is happening currently. Who will commit the fraud in my organization? And how will they commit it? Where must we put the safeguards? Well, we can go back to the characteristics. Let's ignore the highly qualified characteristic. Look at others. How will they commit the fraud? How much will it cost my organization? First, the fraud. How much will the fraud cost? And can we afford to actually investigate the fraud? Do we have if it's $1 million, it might cost us in South Africa 10 million to investigate the fraud. Is it worth it? And will my organization survive the fraud or the corruption? And I think what I want to leave with this tonight is that it is my and your responsibility to insist that people do the right thing and that we do the right thing in going forward. I thank you very much.
There's another bottle for you. So thank you. Let's give another round of applause to our new inaugural professor. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, VC, DVCs, deans of the faculties, and to everybody who is in attendance here this evening. I'm Denise Zinn. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Learning and Teaching, and it is my privilege to congratulate Professor Fourie on behalf of the university. I think of all the academics who are here, the colleagues who are here from faraway places, the students who are assembled here, and of course, on behalf of everyone who is a member of his faculty. So the vision for Nelson Mandela University is to become known for its leadership in generating cutting-edge knowledge for a sustainable future. Professor Fourie's research in this arena could not be more needed for a sustainable future, especially as it relates to issues of ethics and accountability, and the manner in which those responsible for public funds use them for the greater good of our society. As you have heard in the introduction, he is also the director of the School of Accounting. And in this capacity, he not only researches, but is also responsible for leading the department to ensure its graduates fully understand their responsibilities in this regard. This profession is well poised to be an instrument of socio-economic change and work in the interests of the welfare of society. And we need that now more desperately than ever before. As he has stated in his paper, the accounting profession needs to do introspection to determine what society expects of them. A mere audit opinion on annual financial statements does not satisfy the demands of society anymore. And that's a direct quote from him. Professor Fourie, you have helped explain the differences between terms we are hearing frequently on the news in recent times: ethics, fraud, corruption. You have also identified different trends that have occurred over this past period. I found most useful, and I must admit quite frightening, your list of some of the characteristics of organizational fraud, where they occur, and even how there are gender and occupational trends in this regard. I must say I had this little thought that maybe the world would be a better place if it was run by women. On so many counts, not just Ashley Madison. This is an interesting set of trends that you have found. Also, your deduction that fraudsters go through a psychological process of learning to commit fraud. This is really significant because we are in an organization where learning happens, but also where unlearning can happen. We therefore have an important role to play if we are to intervene in the trends you identified, namely that, quote, a higher frequency of fraud cases are reported in the accounting, upper management, and sales departments. I think this is the reason why those of us who are in upper management only get 5-year terms. So, as Rhodes University proclaims, universities are the places where leaders learn. So, colleagues, you have a huge responsibility in this regard. In your summary, you asked a number of critical and what you called uneasy questions. I would say there were also quite a number of controversial issues that you raised, especially in relation to cultures. Very controversial ground, because I think as we try to understand cultures and culture in this modern world, we need to really go into it with a great deal of depth and not in simplistic ways, because we've learned a recent term from a colleague of ours, and that is something called scientific racism. And we've got to be very careful that we do not tread on those particular fields. But I know that was not your intention. I hope many in this audience came with notebooks and that you jotted down some of those critical and uneasy questions that Prof. Fourie asked. Especially ominous in your conclusion, Prof, is that it is not a matter of whether it will happen, but whether or when it will be detected. And you know, if I had an emoji face, I could do that scream thing, which is, it's not whether it will happen, but when it will be detected, which is a frightening thing for all of us to think about. The glimmer of hope that you do provide, however, is to start insisting on doing the right thing. And this, I think, is not only to teach, demonstrate, and live ethical behaviors, but also to manage ethics. So what a sobering set of thoughts you have presented us with tonight, Prof. Fourie. Our university is extremely proud of you and your work, which helps us, our whole community and all our publics, to think seriously about issues, these kinds of issues, and provides important insights, ways of questioning, and taking responsibility for a better, more sustainable, and after this lecture, I want to add an ethical future. We wish to thank your family for sharing you with us over this period. You've contributed so much to this university, including some of the personally very challenging times we know you have encountered. Thank you again to Lynette, to your children, Liani, Adele, and Marilise, the in-laws that go with him, and especially to Janko, who has had to leave the room. But Houdini and I share very delightful pictures and stories about him and about my granddaughter. So I know him well. I'm sure you are all very proud of your husband and dad. So I'd now like to call up the alumni president officer to hand a token of the new stature within the university convocation to Prof. Fourie. And as we're doing that, a very hearty congratulations again on this professorship. Thanks, Prof.
Sit down again.
Yes. The unanswered questions. We also have a lot of unanswered questions in the alumni space. And I would want to invite you to help us answer some of those questions. Yes. So, dear Prof, we want to congratulate you for this achievement that you have gained. The alumni family, I think we must change from association. It's a family. Yeah. It's a welcoming, just like myself.
His name is welcome.
We are looking forward, for your support in the next coming activities. We're looking forward to have your involvement and your continued engagement in these streets of alumni. I'm using a young terminology from a youngster. Please accept this gift from this association to mark this very special occasion in your academic career, in your time at this beautiful, value-based Nelson Mandela University. Best wishes for your future endeavors, and may you continue, and may you continue to inspire a lot of us. Thank you. We are not bribing, eh?
Thank you very much. Congratulations. Well, thanks.
Yes, sir.
So finally, on behalf of Nelson Mandela University, I'd like to thank you all for your attendance at this important event in the almanac of the university. Special thanks to those in the administrative offices and divisions who've been involved with the arrangements here tonight. That has ensured it's gone smoothly. You have been a wonderful and attentive audience, and we are grateful that you honored us with your presence here tonight. We now invite you, once the procession has left the hall, to please join us for light refreshments and that wine that, after the depressing information, that was promised us in the foyer. Thanks, everybody. You stand at the door.
Thanks so much.
You stand at the door and then people will